The driver asked me a normal question, but his voice, it didn't sound like a human anymore. In that exact second, I knew something had gone horribly wrong. This wasn't a scene from a horror movie. This happened on a cold Friday night in Denver, Colorado, just after midnight. I'd finished work late and booked an Uber to my apartment downtown. The app said the driver's name was Brad. 4.98 stars. Polite. No weird reviews. A standard white Toyota Camry. I got into the back seat, put on my headphones, and buried my face in my phone. The first thing I noticed was that the car was too quiet. Not just good insulation quiet, but a heavy, thick kind of silence. It felt like it was filling the space around me, pressing against my eardrums. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Brad's eyes were locked on the road, but his head didn't move an inch. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't looking at the road. He was staring through the windshield, as if into a void. I brushed it off as deep concentration. I muttered my address. No response. Just the low hum of the engine, which felt unnaturally deep, almost at the edge of ultrasonic. Then he spoke, very softly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I pulled out my earbuds. "What?" "Right now, behind you." My heart skipped a beat. I listened. Nothing but the car's vibration. "Probably just the road," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. But then his voice changed. It didn't get louder. It became distorted. It was as if someone had sped up and slowed down a recording of his speech at the same time. It was a sound a human throat shouldn't be able to produce. "I didn't mean outside," he whispered, his eyes finally flickering to mine in the mirror. "I meant right behind you." I froze. My apartment was only 6 minutes away, but in that moment, I felt like we were cut off from the rest of the world by thousands of miles. I slowly turned around. Nothing. An empty seat. Just the dim glow of streetlights passing by the window. But the air had become noticeably heavier, like someone invisible had sat down next to me, almost brushing against my shoulder. "Do you live alone?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "Yeah." He was silent for a few seconds, continuing to drive with that same perfect, dead precision. "How many people actually live with you?" he asked again. "Just me." He waited, and then he whispered, "Is there anyone else you haven't told me about?" At that moment, I felt it, a pressure on the back of my seat, like someone small was leaning forward right behind my left shoulder, trying to peer into my face. I whipped my head around. Nothing. No shadow, no shape. Just the emptiness breathing down my neck. My pulse was racing. I looked at the driver again. He still wouldn't turn his head. "Sometimes," Brad said slowly, stretching the words out, "someone rides with us, but we don't see them." I laughed nervously. "Uber stories? Very funny." "No," he snapped, "not a story." He gently tapped the edge of my seat with his fingertip, just once. It sounded like dry bone hitting plastic. My phone vibrated, but I was too afraid to take my eyes off the mirror. "Late last month, there were reports," Brad continued. "A rider taking an Uber home, alone. The cameras caught them getting into the car." I nodded, not understanding where he was going with this. "The driver claimed he dropped them off at the address, but the rider's phone pinged, and that signal never left the car." I didn't want to hear this. I wanted to jump out of the car while it was still moving. "Look, this is my stop," I shouted, seeing my building. He didn't answer, but the car slowed down smoothly. I scrambled out, nearly falling onto the asphalt. I thanked him, slammed the door, and just stood there, watching the white Toyota vanish into the darkness of the street. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone to make sure the trip had ended. And that's when my world completely fell apart. The app showed that the trip was still active. The map showed my car continuing to move through the city. I opened the trip details. The passenger's name wasn't mine. It was a name I had seen in the news a week ago. Someone who had gone missing. Someone who left home and never returned. The pickup location? Not where I had gotten in. It was the exact block where that person was last seen. My stomach dropped. According to Uber, that passenger was in the car right now. They had never gotten out. I deleted the app immediately. I ran into my building and locked every bolt on my door. I sat in my dark living room trying to convince myself it was a system glitch, that the driver was just trying to freak me out. But late that night, I swear I heard a sound. A faint, barely audible knock on my back door. Just once, slow, deliberate. Exactly like a driver knocking to let you know they've arrived and are waiting for their passenger. I didn't open it. I didn't move. I just stood there in the dark, holding my breath, and whispered a single word into the void. No. Because I knew if I opened that door, my trip would never end either.
I always thought the city at night was safe as long as you were inside a car. Up until that moment, I thought it was just one of those exhausting nights, a long day at work, a hollow head, the inability to sleep. I decided to grab a ride home instead of walking. If I had known that this decision would be the last mistake of my life, I would have preferred sleeping on a bench outside my office. This happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a chilly October evening. You know those nights when the streetlights feel miles away and the shadows seem much heavier than they should be? I ended my shift around midnight. My phone was dying, only 4% left, so I hurriedly booked an Uber with frozen fingers. The app confirmed the driver, Jason. 4.95 stars, no weird reviews, just a guy in a gray Toyota Corolla. The car pulled up within a minute. I got into the back seat without even looking at the driver. I just muttered a quick, "Hey," and gave him my address. He nodded in silence. For the first 30 seconds, we drove in absolute stillness. Nothing but the low hum of the engine and the quiet hiss of tires on damp asphalt. Then he asked, very casually, as if it were small talk, "Do you live alone?" I hesitated. A weird question for a driver, but I brushed it off as misplaced politeness. "Yeah," I said, "just me." He didn't say anything, but I noticed his knuckles whiten as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Have you ever lived with someone else before?" he asked again. This was getting too specific, intrusive. I was about to tell him to mind his own business, but he cut me off. "You've never had a roommate?" His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, like a machine. "No." "Like I said, I live alone," I snapped, trying to end the conversation. Long that a pause followed. Then he turned his head ever so slightly, just enough so I could see his eyes in the rearview mirror. He wasn't looking at the road. He was staring directly at me. He didn't blink. "Some people take rides home at night when they're not really alone," he whispered. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. He didn't answer. He just kept driving through quiet residential streets. Houses with their lights off blurred past us like cardboard cutouts in an old movie. There wasn't a single soul on the sidewalks. Then he did something that made the hair on my neck stand up. He glanced at his phone for directions. But the ride was already confirmed. The route shouldn't have changed. I leaned forward to look over his shoulder and felt my chest tighten. His navigation app wasn't showing the path to my house. The screen showed a single line leading far out of the city into the dark, empty roads where there is nothing but thick woods. "Are we taking a different route?" I asked, panic clawing at my throat. He remained silent. A few minutes later, I noticed something else. His reflection in the mirror, it stopped moving. His head was turned toward the road, but his eyes in the mirror stayed locked on me. They were frozen. "Do you ever hear someone call your name when no one's around?" His voice came again. Now it was slow, dragging. Some people hear whispers, some hear footsteps, and some hear their own voices repeated over and over until they lose their minds. I tried to look out the window to see where we were, but the glass had suddenly fogged up, even though it wasn't cold enough for it.
The car began to slow down. We stopped in the middle of a long stretch of road that dead-ended into a thick black forest. No streetlights, no signs, just impenetrable darkness ahead. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from Uber. "Your driver is waiting. Please rate your experience." But we hadn't arrived yet. I opened the trip details and I nearly dropped the phone. The route wasn't mine. It was an entirely different trip with an unknown pickup point. The location was listed as Unknown Road outside the city limits. And the scariest part, the timestamp. The trip had started 2 days ago. 2 full days before I had even requested a ride. "Jason," I whispered, showing him the screen. "This trip isn't mine." He didn't blink. He just rasped, "It became someone's." I backed away toward the door. "No thanks. I just want to go home." He didn't react. Suddenly, the car doors unlocked on their own with a loud, metallic click. My phone buzzed again. A new message from an unknown number. I opened it and felt the blood drain from my face. The message was from my own phone number. The text was short. "Why did you wake it up?" I stared at the screen, unable to believe my eyes. And that's when I felt it. A presence right behind me. Something heavy. Something that smelled like wet earth and old copper. I felt a damp breath on my neck. Someone whispered my name. I dropped my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shape in the back seat next to me. It wasn't human. It was something tall, blurred at the edges, as if it didn't fully belong to our world. It leaned forward, and I saw its smile. It wasn't a human smile. It was a jagged tear in its face, twisted into a horrific grimace. I slammed the door open and ran. I didn't run toward my house or toward safety. I just ran into the darkness, not looking where I was going. The last thing I heard before the forest swallowed me whole was a voice. Soft, calm, speaking right into my ear. "Finish the ride." The next morning, my phone was found in my apartment. It was lying on the table, unlocked. The Uber app was open. Trip status, completed. Driver, unknown. Distance traveled, 54.3 miles. Rating, 1 star. And my name was listed as the last passenger. But I wasn't in the apartment. And I never will be again.